Hello.
Morning, Hezzy.
Howdy.
Howdy. Sorry for the delay.
That's okay. I have two quick questions.
Sure.
One's a question. Why does my post in the private chat show up twice? And is it always going to?
It wasn't the private
Yeah,
chat.
in the comments.
In the comments.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Oh, in the comments, yeah.
I think, did it post to both places, both channels?
Oh, maybe. Okay. The only other thing I wanted to mention was I'm good for about an hour. I have a 3 o'clock undercoating for my car out 20 minutes south, and it was freezing rain this morning, so I'm going to allow time.
No problem. We're going to go for an hour or I guess like 50 minutes now. So I'm just going to give another minute or two for Bill to join on if he can. And we'll dive. I was going to say we'll dive right in, but oh, wow. Yes. Jacob. I actually didn't think you were going to join, but now that you did, the whole dynamic changes.
I wasn't planning on joining, but I figured Chezi's gonna go all Zionist on us, so I had to kind of jump in here.
You should know that I actually went through my notes again and I shaved more Zionism out of it. I was trying to keep this as respectful as possible. No, but you could definitely assist. What I want to do today is, well, let's take a step back. And Jacob's here. So first of all, I just want to thank Jacob in this crowd over here because we're all here thanks to him. I mean, we're all here thanks to God, obviously, but we're all here thanks to his mediators. And in this case, the person that created this space and was channeling this energy was Jacob. So I think this is really fantastic. And thank you for cultivating this. Secondly, while we are going to go through the Brit Shalom, and this is what this is generally scheduled for, I did want to today first start with a general sort of lay of the land with regards to where we stand from a Jewish law halachic point of view with regards to Jews and the other nations, and then zoom in closer and closer towards the Noahide specifically. And we might touch on a little of the applications today, but like I said, we're probably going to get into chapter 1, chapter 2 next week. Aside from that, I want to also stress the fact that I am not a rabbi, and it is very important in this process to seek guidance with a rabbi. I don't mind helping out and answering questions and acting as a funnel, but we are privileged, or at least I think so, to have a connection to Brit Olam, the Noahide World Center, and Rav Shirky. So that is available to everyone over here as well for guidance. And the reason this is important is because, as we'll see, there are various opinions with regards to how these laws and are applied. And it's important because some of these interpretations that we'll get into will show you that there is seemingly more flexibility with how a Noahide expresses himself, whether that is a quote unquote bug or a feature we could discuss. But regardless, it's important to find a rabbinical anchor which could guide you through your specific journey. Obviously, we hope and we pray that ultimately these communities, such as ours, could get larger and larger, and they are, and that will have its own ramifications to your own rabbis and your own developed halacha, so to speak. So, as we say in Arabic, shwaya shwaya, slowly, we're moving towards that. But I wanted to preface those things. Jacob, if I could ask you do you mind being a Svaria dude for us?
I would love to be a Svaria dude for you guys. My first question, is there a reason you're using this layout as opposed to like this layout?
Well, I guess I thought more people are going to. First of all, you're the master, so here it is.
Okay. While people are, I mean, might as well let people see your beautiful face. I wanted to add one thing to what you said, though, and I'm very glad you went down this line because I was actually going to kind of insert it, and I'm glad we were thinking the same things, similar things at least, which is it's really, really important to realize that there is a unity in diversity. There's a tiferet, there's a beauty of, or as Luke likes to call it, mosaic vision, right? Of the fact that there are a diversity of opinions, and that's part of the Jewish way of life. So everybody has their rabbis, and rabbis disagree, and elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. Now, you have to be careful not to be doing the cafeteria thing, and but so whether you're studying Rav Shirky's work or your Rabbi Wiener's work or any other, there are people getting more and more involved, thank God. Rabbi Breitowitz answers people's emails. There are poskim who are qualified, which is great. But it's really important to realize that, okay, there is a diversity. That doesn't mean there's anything goes, but there are different ways, and all of them are legitimate.
Well, like Jacob said, all of them within the legitimate structure are legitimate, and that's why. While I think a good example is many times you will see Jacob and I disagree quite vigorously, and you will sometimes hear from one rabbi and another rabbi two different opinions that sound speaking in very harsh language, but that doesn't mean that they don't see the other opinion, like Jacob says, as still relevant and is still valid within a certain framework. So without further ado, I want to zoom all the way out and take us to where this journey begins. So, Jacob, if you could take us to Genesis 12:3.
Genesis 12:3. Oh, why am I? Okay. Genesis.
Jonathan, you're down to read?
In Hebrew?
No. English?
Sure. Although should I start with and?
Yeah.
That's where
That's where it starts. Okay.
Starts, yeah.
All right. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curses thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed.
Exactly. So we have God speaking to Abraham. Abraham, as the Midrash tells us, also is a survivor of the Babel the Babel catastrophe, and he's leaving that convoluted speech and is going on the other side of the river. He's turning to the Hebrew, to the Ivri, and is on his own journey. And God says, because I see that you're going to teach your kids, and I see that you are interested in taking what you understood intuitively, and then through your relationship with me, onto your offspring, where I failed a few times, so to speak, with Enoch and Noah and Seth and different layers, but finally I found someone that wants to pass this on properly. And because of this, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Nivrachu also in Hebrew can mean to, in a certain way, also to graft together, like with the plant. Everyone is supposed to be connected and coming out through this tree. Now, this is a very universal message that in Judaism, sometimes we forget we've been for the last 2,000 years in exile and really thinking inwards, right? How are we surviving? How are we keeping this operation afloat, so to speak? And Jacob, excuse me, but as we return to the land, forget the concept of Zion, but as the Jewish people as a whole experience this phenomenon of some sort of return to the land and some sort of sovereignty, so to speak, there is more room and flexibility to start having this conversation artwards towards the people and the families of the earth. So that is a great place to start. Jacob, if you could take us to Shema Yisrael Hashem Eloheinu Hashem Echad in Parashat Ve'et Hanan.
Deuteronomy 6:4. Yeah.
And take us to...
It was my having to remember what Christians are saying when I had to start memorizing verse numbers.
Okay, so we have here, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Can you take us to the first Rashi? Bill, I'm glad you're here with us. I hope you're doing well.
Let me make this normal sized for a second because...
Sandy, are you in the mood to read, participate, or are you in the listening mode and zero pressure, by the way?
Oh, no, I don't mind reading. Just if you give pop quizzes on rabbi names.
No. Okay. Okay, so take it away, Sandy. What is Rashi telling us over here? And just to preface this, Rashi's general methods of interpretation is trying to keep it at the most surface level of interpretation. So this is seemingly, he isn't digging deep down and going through the mystical worlds to give us this answer right now. So by all means.
Okay. Adonai our God, Adonai is one. He is our God, Eloheinu, now and not the God of other nations. And in the future, he will be one God, Adonai Echad, as it is written. For then I will return to the peoples a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord. It's from Zephaniah 3:9. And it is said, in that day shall the Lord be one, and his name one, from Zechariah 14:9. Don't know the Hebrew.
That's all great. Thank you so much. So here, where I would say, generally speak about this verse as, our declaration of monotheism, there's the way Rashi is reading this is really more of a mission statement, which is we are familiar and understand that Hashem Eloheinu, Hashem Echad, and there's the internal conversation of the agentic and the arena God and seeing them both as one. But there's also an understanding over here, which is we have to proclaim this, and we have to understand that the world eventually, the families of the earth, will also see this to be true. And it's again, this is very important. We're seeing it as a mission statement, which is generally speaking, while we have our inward conversation, we are on a universal mission. And right now we are embodying that, obviously through screens, but we are embodying that right now as well. So the question we need to ask then, once we start talking about Jews and the families of the earth, are what kind of relationship is this? Is this a joint status? Are we walking hand in hand, or where the lines are a little more blurred, or are we stressing the hierarchy more? So here too, even in the prophets, we have different versions, different options, so to speak. Jacob, if you don't mind opening Ezekiel 44:9. You know what? You're going to open up Isaiah 61, verse 5. I'm going to just read out Ezekiel 44:9. Thus said the sovereign God, let no alien, uncircumcised in spirit and flesh enter my sanctuary. no alien whatsoever among the people of Israel. Right? So these are not fighting words, so to speak, but there's a sense of hierarchy over here, the sense that the alien, the foreigner, is not welcome inside. Jacob, I didn't hear you. You're on mute, but if you were saying something. All right.
I was asking Isaiah what?
Isaiah 61:5. And the strangers shall stand and pasture your flocks. Aliens shall be your plowers and vine trimmers, while you shall be called priests of God and termed servants of our God. You shall enjoy the wealth of the nations and reveal in their riches. Right. So here again, we could see the Israelites are teaching the Torah. They are the priests of God. And then there is the rest of the nations who are the division over here of men of spirit and men of action. But again, there is a stress on a difference over here. However, there are other options that we're going to see in Isaiah 56:3 and in Zephaniah 3:9. Zephaniah 3:9 is what we just read earlier that Rashi mentions. For then I will make the people pure speech, so they will invoke God's name and render service with one accord. Right? That's a conversation. And Shechem Echad, one accord in Hebrew, really means shoulder. We're all shoulder to shoulder standing together. In Isaiah 56:3, we have, let no foreigner say, who is joined to God? God will keep me apart from his covenanted people, and let not the, in Hebrew of here, Enoch say, I am a withered tree. And number 6, we have, as the foreigners who have joined to God to render service and to love God's name, to be devoted servants, all who keep the Sabbath and do not profane it, and who hold fast to my covenant. And here again, there's a conversation which is a lot more, the lines are more blurred. God is taking in the people, and they're having a much more cohesive relationship going on over here as well.
That was a really cute attempt, but eunuch is a Latin word meaning saris.
Oh, eunuch. Okay, I was reading it. I'm like, what is it? I know the word eunuch, but this is reading it wrong. Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yes, saris of here. I'm reading it in English, which I'm usually used to reading this in Hebrew, of course. Okay. Just as far as the line in Zephaniah, there's some that interpret the fact that we're going to speaking pure speech. It's talking about Hebrew, Sfat HaKodesh, the divine language, the holy language. However, there's obviously many other interpretations that actually talk about the fact that it's diverse. It's clear because we are all speaking in the jargon we're speaking is understood by all, but we could be speaking about it differently, and it could be expressed differently as well. Okay. Then there's a question, now that we're looking at these two different options. Again, there's an option. Is this Jerusalem focused? Or are we talking about, again, a more universal outward kind of operation happening that's more spread out? So we see, let's say in Zechariah 8:14, there's a stress that Jerusalem is the religious and the theological center. And on the flip side, Jacob, if you don't mind reading 8:14.
Sure. For thus says the Lord of hosts, as I intended to do you mischief when your fathers provoked me to anger, says the Lord of hosts, and I did not relent, so have I turned about and do propose in these days to do good to Jerusalem and the house of Yehuda. Fear not.
But if we look at Micah 4:5, we see a more dispersed conversation of worship. Though all the peoples walk each in the names of its gods, we will walk in the name of the eternal, our God, forever and ever. And this, in its context, is the prophet is not upset at the foreigner over here. It's just understanding that the foreigner comes to Jerusalem for inspiration and guidance, and then returns to his own personal religious practice, right? So in this case, it's more, as I mentioned in the past, coming to Jerusalem for them to see, like, have a them opening up their theological toolkit, having a discussion, and then going back and still practicing it in their own specific way. This also hints a little to the idea where the Zohar and the Ramban talk about how the other world religions were allowed to have their own heavenly mediators. However, the Israelites and the Jews have their direct line. And this eventually will echo into the concepts of Shituf, which we'll touch in the later chapters on. But this is where these ideas are stemming from. In Isaiah 19, we talk about, in that day there shall be an altar to God inside the land of Egypt, and a pillar to God at its border. For God of hosts will bless them, saying, blessed my people Egypt, my handiwork Assyria, my very own Israel. So here too, we're seeing a conversation where there's altars being built outside of Israel. We're calling Egypt my people, which is usually a name that's reserved for the Israelites, and my handiwork Assyria. And these are obviously people that created a tremendous amount of trauma for Israel as well. Yet God says eventually there's a conversation where everyone gets to come back home. So here too, we're talking about a conversation that's more dispersed. So when we're looking at these different options over here, hierarchy to blurred lines, to focus on Jerusalem, to disperse, we could see that there's a conversation over here, and we're being invited with God to, in a certain sense, shape the future. And God is giving us an option to co-create with him. Jacob, if you could read this fantastic and extraordinary verse from Genesis 2:19. By the way, so far, is this all clear? Am I going too fast? All's good. Okay.
And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name.
If this was not written down, as the sages say, like, we wouldn't even be able to talk about it, because it's such a crazy verse that God is saying, like, well, you know what? Let's see what this guy Adam has. You know, he seems like an interesting dude. I'm going to roll with what he's going. I'm giving him, director privileges over here. And just to stress the difference, in the Quran, the way this story is given, God teaches Adam the names of the animal, but Adam doesn't himself name the animals. And this also materializes in Islam, where you have a submission, right? The names are being given to me. To here, we're seeing the Bible letting us know that no, there is a joint conversation happening together. Jacob and I have spoken a lot about this concept of Achnai's oven, this famous story that the Talmud talks about, where there's a disagreement between the rabbis, and one rabbi, after all different types of miracles that he's performing in the name of God and through the power of God, proving his point, which crescendos and culminates in him, crescendos at the heavenly voice coming out and saying that I agree with this specific rabbi. Ultimately, the rabbis and the majority wins, because they say the Torah was given to us. The Torah is given to people. It's no longer in the heavens. And this is, again, echoing all the way from the fact that God created the earth, and then there was a joint conversation that's happening together. And that allows us, in a certain sense, to shape the future, because we're being given this land and we're giving this universe to work together with God through it. Which brings us to these, before I actually go into it, I want to just mention that specifically when we look at these prophets, there's a Talmud verse that talks about how no two prophets prophetize the same. And there's different stylistic options going on over here as well. And these are options that are given before us as people that have the options and the capability to shape the future, which is what kind of future do we see for the Noahide people and the Israelites? Is there a conversation where there is going to have to be a stressed hierarchy, and there's prophecies of devastations and war, and there's prophecies that are a little less violent and more cohesive? So this really has to do with how we together here, and as the community grows, how do we want to shape this? How do we want to do this together with God? And of course, within the 4 cubits of halacha, and with the flexibility they give us as well. So having said that, we can start zooming in a little closer now to the 7 laws themselves, which by now many of you guys are already familiar with. So I'm going to have a general discussion first, which is, why do we have these 7 laws, right? So we see that when God saw how corrupted the earth was, for all flesh has corrupted in its ways on earth, right? God sees that this is really done, and I need to really wipe earth completely out. And we have our horrible flood story as well. This is also why and there's been different academics and rabbis that touched upon this, about similarities with the Code of Hammurabi and other local codes in the region of that time, which also have a breakdown of 7 laws that correlate as well. There's different ways how they're categorized. There's a book by Revolution Team that goes through this as well, which I could put in the links later. Either way, you could see that this is something that happens around the time of the flood as well, that these basic laws they're introduced. And these laws are really here to express what's required to safeguard the world created by God. We have idol worship and blasphemy, which is basically an attack on God. We have sexual immorality and murder, which is an attack on life. We have dinim and robbery, which is an attack on property. And we have then eating the limb, which is, this is, unlike the other, this declares really that the destruction is nature itself. There's these levels of God and life and property, but then there's just nature itself, which we could see. And even in the covenant of Noah specifically, we see how there's this issue with how we're treating earth itself. This is also why for a status of a ger toshav, a resident alien, which many times people correlate with Noahide as well, it makes sense why he has to accept these if he's going to live among the Israelites in the land, because it's a prerequisite that you're going to accept the basic moral fabrics. Only then can you live among the Israelites. We could also see that these commandments historically protect us from being removed from society. We see when Cain is the first one to murder, he's sent out to exile. We see that robbery and sexual immorality was the cause of the flood. Nothing to do politically, but the term is called Hamas. And this has to do with, again, God seeing that there was decay in the world, but due to acts of robbery and sexual immorality. And here again, we're kicked out of the land. And dinim it's basically required to allow the existence. I need a system of rules. I need a structure. I need a playing field where I could actually walk around and express myself with my relationship with God. But for that, I need to know that I'm protected from theft, from robbery, that I have some sort of recourse. So these kind of guidelines are needed to create a moral society. There could be a question, which many ask, which is 7. If what you're saying is true, Chazi, that this is that this is required as like the basic level of what we need to keep this world afloat, why is it only 7? So as you all purchase this book, Brit Shalom, you could see it's clearly more than 7. But even the sages early on discuss how it's really 30. Some say it's 60. But the ideas are that these are things that these are principles that could be expanded on. The 613 really stem from 10 ultimately. And here too, you have the 10 utterances that God needed to create the world. However, that happened, God didn't need, God used to create the world. However, those 10 utterances are happening within the framework of 7 days. So here again, you could see this play of 10 and 7, where these are principles that we could flush out ideas from. We have 10 that gives us 613. We have 7 that give us, at the very least, the amount that we find in this book over here. Right. Okay. Any questions? Moving forward. I want to actually see how I want to do this next part. Okay. Okay. Now, I'm going to start a little with Rambam, and then we're going to dive into Rambam, and we're going to touch upon these few thinkers and rabbis that I sent out that you guys might have and might not take a chance to look at, and if not, no pressure. So it seems like the rabbis want to use these 7 to maintain the world, but it's not necessarily a religious pathway for the nations of the world. So this is like the basic prerequisite, but some rabbis don't see this as a religious pathway necessarily. The Rambam sees these 7, they must be connected to Sinai and through Moses. And yes, it might have happened earlier on, but ultimately it's very important for the Rambam, and we'll talk about why soon. It's very important for him that this stems from Sinai and Moses. And it's not that you're doing this because it makes sense from a logical point of view. However, it's hard to see how the Rambam is saying this because, and this is not controversial, there isn't a clear source on making this claim. Rambam is interpreting what he's seeing from the Talmud and what he's seeing from the sages before him and their sources in the Bible, which is not spelled out clearly like we have with the Jewish laws and mitzvot. Okay, so now what's behind the Rambam's thought process? Jacob, do you want to just give us a little touch on the Rambam for a second? Just a one minute explanation who we're talking about?
Oh, who we're talking about. So Maimonides lived almost 1,000 years ago, and he is one of the 3 pillars of halacha, meaning that his opinion is considered foundational for the code of Jewish law and what defines Orthodox Judaism. In fact, the 13 principles of Jewish faith, by which almost all of Orthodoxy defines what exactly Orthodox Judaism is, come from his commentary to the Mishnah, which he wrote at age 26, I believe, and his magnum opus, the Mishneh Torah, I usually translate that as restatement of the law, is considered a fundamental work of codifying. It was the first real codification of Jewish law. And since he codified, he is one of the few early rabbis and foundational rabbis to systematically speak about the role of Noahides, and his opinion is very foundational to everything we talk about in Orthodox Judaism, and has been the basis for the rest of the discussion. While not every rabbi agrees with every particular of what Maimonides said, certainly what Maimonides says is one opinion which cannot be ever dismissed within Orthodox Judaism, and we always have to have some degree of deference for what is in the Mishneh Torah, at the very least. And because it is the first codification, it really is the foundation for the rest of the discussions.
Now, Jacob, thank you very much for that. Now, to stress, the Rambam was like a powerhouse. He was extremely meticulous, and careful readings of his works and comparing different sections. And this is very relevant to our discussion. However, we'll get into more of the details later on. There are specific words and terms that he uses that could completely change. You could have a 180 degree opinion, basically, that seems that the Rambam is contradicting himself. But if a careful reading, and for this we obviously need our sages who have done their homework and know how to read the Rambam. And this goes all the way to censored manuscripts that now have come to light, or realizing that certain rabbis did not have the, let's say, the Rambam in front of them at the time when they were giving their opinion. So these things need to be taken into consideration as well.
I could not stress what Chazi is saying enough. It is incredibly important what he's saying, and a lot of people miss it. If you think that you can open up Maimonides and read a sentence out of there and take it in isolation from the entirety of the work, it is not, for example, in any way similar to, for example, you might be familiar with the Catechism of the Catholic Church or any other catechism where in Christianity, that is meant to, each section is supposed to by itself be informative and help you understand. That's not how we approach Maimonides, and that's not how he wrote it, because it's very obvious that in various sections, when he's talking in certain about certain things, he's talking in isolation. And when we talk about something that practically today applies, oftentimes just a snippet or even a whole chapter of Maimonides by itself, a cursory reading is going to definitely run you astray. Not only is it that Maimonides is sometimes himself what's called a dat yachid, an individual opinion, so the majority of the opinion isn't like what he says, but there are a lot of opinions. If I have the book in front of me, I think I do. Here it is. So this is Rabbi Wiener's book, Sheva Mitzvot Hashem, which has also been translated into English mostly. And it, the first 30, 40 pages just are a discussion of how various rabbis, two of the greatest rabbis, the Rogachover, the Brisker, are discussing that one chapter, like individual verses in chapter 8 of Laws of Kings and Wars, where Maimonides talks about Noahides and the various opinions on what was Maimonides' opinion, not even what is what we should be doing, but trying to understand what Maimonides himself is saying at the time. So please, for the love of God, do not just take a halacha, one snippet out of Maimonides, and think that because it says that, it says what you think it says, because that's not how it was written to be read, and that's not what kind of book it is.
So yes, Jacob, thank you for stressing that even more. I was going to get into the guide to the perplexed, but it's a whole other journey, so forget that. Okay, so moving on. Let's get back into the Rambam for a moment. What's behind the Rambam's thought process? And I'm purposely not bringing up the text right now just because of how exactly Jacob explained this. That doesn't mean at later classes that we're not going to open up the text and look inside as well. But for right now, again, we're at still the intro level. Okay, so what's behind the Rambam's process? There's 5, let's say, general fundamental points. One is there's one truth. In his classic form, right, he doesn't want any contradictions. He's looking for one source of the religion. It's very important for him, and we're going back to why this needs to connect back to Sinai. Sinai specifically is unique, right? Only Moses could pass on like an eternal commandment from God. The other prophets speak about what Moses gave, but they're not being commanded by God to give the Israelites the Torah. Rather, they're just there to echo and stress what was already given. But only Moses was at that position and at that level that he could do so. The commandments themselves, they need to be done because God is commanding them. So if you want a place where if you're talking about concepts of the world to come, which is metaphysical, then the commandment for that needs to also be, the source for that needs to be metaphysical as well. So again, it's extremely important that those commandments that are coming from God are metaphysical and relate back to Sinai as well. And there needs to be a precise theology. So as far as the Rambam's concerned, again, there's no wiggle room for, images of God or, exploring concepts that, like, we're talking about in Daniel. However, there's pushback on this. There's the Rabbad mentions how many rabbis over the years, sages over the years, spoke about God in a more physical manner. And again, this is where you could see Rambam has his own vision, which doesn't necessarily mean everyone is going to agree with. There's a little more pushback, which is it's very hard that God will forsake them if they were not given a chance sort of to take on this Torah, right? So it's weird that he has to connect it back to Sinai because they weren't necessarily involved in that. And not only that, he's coming out and saying in that chapter that there's potentially no salvation. And here too, the question would be, the Rambam's source itself is not a very clear source in the Bible. And for him to say that there's no salvation off of something that is not necessarily fully clear, this also has some pushback from other rabbis. There are other sources that say that it doesn't, and we'll get into them later, that it doesn't necessarily need to be connected to Sinai. Well, even the Rambam himself uses one of the sources, but if you dig into the source, he mentions how it doesn't have to be connected to Sinai. Rather, you have to recognize that it's from God himself. Now, here too, there's the Rambam uses words called Chassid and Chacham. And Chassid is someone that is accepting the 7 laws from Sinai and from Moses and is rewarded in a place in the world to come. And there's a Chacham, the wise man of the nations, who's doing this because this makes sense. And the Rambam sees him as someone that gains his reward in this world, but doesn't necessarily have a place in the world to come. There is a rabbi named Rav Kook, who his interpretation was that with regards to the Chacham, he's actually at a higher level because he doesn't need to be told to do this, and he is granted a place in the world to come. Continuing with the Rambam, which is a discussion with, is this a religion or not? So as far as the Rambam is concerned, since it comes from Revelation, it's a religion. The Rambam also calls it the Torah of the Noahides, Torat B'nai Noach. He doesn't just say the Noahide path, but he calls it a Torah. And making sure that he's not leaving any room for other religions, and also adds the restriction from Deuteronomy 13:1, be careful to observe only that which I enjoin upon you, neither add to it nor take away from it. Okay, so, and some of this also relates to how the Rambam sees the concept of Shabbat, but we won't dig into that too much. But we see the Rambam is actually taking verses from our Torah and connecting it to the requirement for the Noahides as well, and that's why he's still keeping it all within this Torah, Sinai, Moses world. Now, with regards to the Rambam, again, from a high level, the way he sees the ramifications of keeping other types of commandments. So the Rambam says that Noahides can keep any commandment they want, initially. Now, it's important that he says that they are doing this because any commandment that they keep, they are doing so because they want to, not because they're obligated to. And there's ramifications with how you pray as well, because you don't say Asher Tzivanu, God commanded me to do so. And this is similar to how certain mitzvot apply to women in Jewish law. which is something called mitzvot aseh shazman grama, that they are connected to time, and certain women, if they want to participate in these commandments, can do so, but their reward is different because they weren't commanded to do so. Rather, they are doing so electively. Some rabbis limit the amount of commandments that a Noahide could take on as well. Now, so on one hand, we see that Sinai is very restricting with regards to new religions, as far as Rambam's considered. He said there's no other conversation happening besides the Jewish conversation and that what you're doing as a Noahide. On the other hand, it does expand more involvement. So while there's seemingly limitations that Rambam tells us, he does offer another route. And he mentions not only the tribe of Levi, but any one of the inhabitants of the world whose spirit generously motivates him, and he understands with his wisdom to set himself aside and stand before God to serve him and minister to him and to know God, pursuing justly as God made him, removing from his neck the yoke of many reckonings which people seek. He is sanctified as holy of holies. And here he's talking about, again, any one of the inhabitants of the world. Okay, so here too, here we see an option which is for anyone with no recognition of Sinai, right? So we see the Rambam's giving us two options over here. One, which is only the route through Sinai, and then one where he says, like, no, anyone from the inhabitant of the world who just feels motivated and he's this person that he wants to connect. Now, there's an interpretation. Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, so I totally feel for you because I see that in this, you're trying to thread a very difficult line here of how do I get down to the specifics and how do I stay out in right? And I was thinking maybe if people in the comments or Jonathan or Sandy could tell us, are we getting too detailed into specifics regarding what Rambam says about particular things, or not detailed enough, or
I think it's just getting interesting for me, but that's where I'm at. Unfortunately, I have to hop off in 3 minutes. I can come back later, but
well, I'm going to have a Pirkei here soon, but we'll continue later where we stopped off. But
this is good.
Question though, it's like, how about you, Sandy?
I like listening. I know that some of the guys that contribute their previous readings and things have read more than I have, and therefore they will hear some of this in a place where they already know some of the words and dialogue. But that doesn't matter. I don't mind hearing it.
And in the comment sections, if there's any questions, like Jacob asked, if this is too detailed, like Jacob mentions, I'm trying to thread a line and keep it still at a relatively high level,
yeah. And honestly, I mean, one thing, so if anybody has questions like how can Maimonides go off on and mention, for example, have things that don't appear to be based on the text. I mean, there's a whole philosophy of the oral law which goes into how all of that is, and we could talk about. So Lynn says she's enjoying fascinating.
So
and
Jake
Bill says you're doing great. But
thanks. I wanna, because I know Jonathan needs to hop off as well, and I know also Sandy, you also need a bounce soon.
I have a 3 o'clock and about a half an hour to go, so around 2:30 I gotta leave.
So just to end on these two different routes and an interpretation that it could be that what Rambam is alluding to, which is there is in the laws of kings, the Noahide keeping the 7 laws is because of the Sinai revelation, and that is the path of Moses, and that is the path for the masses, for the community, for the Noahide path altogether. Moses is saying, if you want to do this proper, or you want to do this as a community, tether yourself and anchor yourself to the route of Sinai back to God and the Israelites. However, in the laws of Shemitah, where I read, where I quoted that other verse with regards to someone that feels motivated to do so, there's another route, which is the path of Abraham. And this is the path of the individual. So what Rambam is saying over here is like for the guy or the unique man that is living and doing his own thing and wants to connect, guess what? You could do so as well. But you're alone and you're unique, and that you decided to do this all by yourself. It's you're going to be alone. So you can know that those things are happening, but you're not part of this community. However, if you want to connect yourself, and again, that's in a certain way. Also, he's mentioning that potentially the Buddhist sitting at the top of the mountain in isolation, right? Maybe he made it. Maybe he gets there at the end of the day. And I'm not going to use the term Olam Haba, the world to come, because that's a Jewish term. He's going to use his Nirvana term. He's going to use whatever he wants. But Rambam's saying, yeah, like you might get there.
Can I tell you where I'm listening from?
I'm sorry?
Can I answer your previous question and tell you where I'm listening from?
Sure, of course.
So my son turned 37 on Sunday. And I have spent that many years walking between the hearing and deaf communities and the various histories that they had. And so I'm listening from a place where on one hand, we're talking about ASL is the correct, proper, and actual language, not a made up thing to accommodate, which signed English was. So I'm listening to all of the different, I'm listening from the place where my heart and spirit learned to be still in front of a whole whack of things that I couldn't possibly file in a billion places and build it myself. But that doesn't matter. I'm not trying to build it myself. I'm just trying to listen.
I got you. Thank you for sharing, Sandy. All right. So I have actually another half an hour until I'm going to start the Pirkei Avot, which everyone's welcome to join. We could continue this discussion freely right now. However, next week we're going to go through a general understanding of how the Meiri sees this, how the Rial saw this, how Rav Yosef Albo saw this, and how Rav Kook saw this. And this is just giving you a flavor and sort of painting a picture how this is being seen in the rabbinical eyes, which you're going to see is diverse, but there is a commonality to them as well. And then we will go into the actual Brit Shalom guide and make our way through that as well. Again, I recommend reading the introduction because the introduction is very complementary to what we just discussed as well. And I'll just end this official segment with, as Rihal says, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, Yisrael be'umot ha'olam kelev ba'evarim. We are a heart in the Israel is in the nation is like a heart in the bodies. And if you had a body made only out of hands, it would be a monster. Or only out of hearts, it would be a monster. However, there is needed a harmonious relationship between all the body parts for it to move properly. And we are all made in the image of God, and he's expecting this image to walk upright as well. And with that, we'll end this specific class. But again, all are welcome to join in half an hour on the Pirkei Avot Shir. And Jacob, you could continue this going right now, and anyone is welcome to join, or we're gonna end
I'm going to end this right now. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you all for joining, and I will see you next week. I'm going to write on the Discord exactly what time, because maybe we'll see where people are holding. But thank you so much. And if there's any comments or questions that you guys have, please send it. You could send it to me directly. You could send it on to the group, and I'm sure Yosef and Jacob will be on that as well. Have a great day, all of you. Goodbye.